Evidence of a deepening slump in Vancouver's housing market. New home prices in the city fell 0.3% in November, marking the first decline in almost 2 years, according to Statistics Canada. Toronto, meanwhile, saw prices rise 0.4%. Our next guest expects this two-speed trend to continue, and for more, I'm joined by Phil Soper, who is president and CEO of Royal LePage. Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
We're going to talk about the tale of two cities. We'll start with Vancouver, obviously, where you see a correction in 2017 for Greater Vancouver. What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, we're looking at an 8.5% year-over-year decline in home prices. That's after, in the fourth quarter numbers we just released, they were up 26% year-over-year. So giving back some of the gains that were made in the previous year.
And then if you contrast that with Greater Toronto?
This year, up 16% year over year in Toronto. We're expecting Toronto to take over from Vancouver as a leading appreciator, if you will, but only at 10%. So relatively moderate, but still much above the long-term norm.
So 10%, sorry, sort of for the 416 area, the core city.
4% for the GTA. For the Greater Toronto area.
Okay, and I guess it's not hard to understand why this is happening. Obviously, there's been a lot more regulation on the West Coast to try to rein in that market. Obvious question is, will we see it here in Toronto?
Yeah. Well, and mostly I'd say it was affordability driven. We actually saw the early signs of Vancouver slowing as far back as April. So we had called a fourth quarter softening of prices. It got exacerbated, and call it a lineman tipping on his heels and a small push from the regulators, particularly the foreign buyer tax, pushed the market much harder than it would have been otherwise.
Okay, so clearly then you don't see, lots of people watching this would disagree, I'm sure, but you don't see Toronto as being unaffordable yet.
No, and relatively, in the fourth quarter, Royal LePage House Price Composite, 1.2 million in Vancouver, 700,000 in Toronto. That's huge. That's a massive difference, and Toronto's just so much bigger than Vancouver that there's a lot more room for slack in the market. Vancouver's very twitchy. We had a correction, a significant one, in 2012 in Vancouver that most of the country wouldn't have even noticed. So it does tend to go up and correct more than any other jurisdiction in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about Toronto being much bigger. If you mean geographically as well, that's sort of
transaction based.
Anticipates my next question, which is on the supply side. How long can supply continue to drag behind the demand in the city? Does that gap keep widening? Or?
I think it will. Right now, if you look at the relative cost of a condo and a detached home in Toronto, they're quite different. But it's nowhere near the gap you see in Vancouver. So I think we've got a lot more of a widening of the gap between detached homes and condominiums, because we can address the supply concern on the condominium side. On the detached home side, it's a challenge, and I think we're going to continue to see above average price appreciation in Toronto and detached homes for the foreseeable future.
You talk about the foreign buyer tax on the West Coast really being the tipping point, right? Yeah. Do you see something similar being unrolled by policymakers in Toronto?
I don't think so, and I'm basing this only on public comments at both the provincial and the municipal level. The tax didn't work the way it was supposed to in Vancouver. They were expecting, there's about 4.5% to 5% of the transactions in the Lower Mainland that are foreign buyers. That's the best estimate we have. 40% of the transactions disappeared. So the impact was 10 times as great as simply taking foreign buyers out of the market. It hammered consumer confidence. And of course, all those people are voters, all those homeowners. So homeownership rates are a little lower in Vancouver, but it's still 65%, not 70% like it is elsewhere. And a lot of people, will be unhappy that their home prices their homes are less valuable than they were before these moves. So I don't think it's a very popular move, and it was also a little schizophrenic because it was followed by a stimulative move in terms of interest-free loans in the area. So the housing policy isn't regarded, or BC housing policy isn't regarded as best of breed.